Today, we are diving into a text that has shaped entire civilizations. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? Let's peel back the cover and discover the complex, controversial, and deeply human story of how this incredible library of books truly came to be. Okay, so let's just jump right in. We tend to think of the Bible as this single, solid book, right? One unified volume. But what if the real story, the real power, is that it's not a book at all? What if it's actually a library, a collection of competing voices and arguments that people battled over for centuries? To really get the Bible, you first have to kind of take apart the physical object in your mind. Stop thinking of it as one single story. Instead, start seeing it for what it is, an anthology, a curated collection that tells a much, much bigger story about history, belief, and, yeah, power. I mean, the clue is right there in the name. The word Bible comes from the Greek ta biblia, which is plural. It literally means the books. It's a direct hint that we are dealing with a library, one assembled over a huge stretch of time by tons of different people in different places, all with their own reasons for writing. Just look at the New Testament, for example. We're talking about 27 different books. And get this, they were written by at least 15 different authors over a 70-year window between roughly 50 and 120 CE. So much can change in 70 years. The collection itself reflects a huge amount of theological and historical development. So yeah, this immediately brings up a huge question we need to peel back. Who actually wrote all these books? If this is a library, who were the authors and the librarians who decided what went on the shelves? And, well, the answers that scholars have found are pretty surprising, and they definitely challenge some long-held traditions. For centuries, it was just taken as a matter of faith. You know, Matthew wrote the Gospel of Matthew, Peter wrote the letters of Peter. Simple. But modern scholarship using the exact same historical tools you'd use for any other ancient text has really turned that traditional view on its head. Oh, and check out the story of Marie-Joseph Lagrange. This guy was a brilliant Dominican priest and a top-tier biblical scholar. But when he started using modern historical methods, asking questions like, did Moses really write the first 5 books of the Bible? He was accused of being a modernist and was basically silenced. He was forbidden from teaching or publishing on it. The incredible irony, the methods he used are now totally standard, even among Catholic scholars. And this table right here really lays out the gap between tradition and scholarship. The Gospels? It turns out they're technically anonymous. Many of the letters that say they're from Paul were probably written by his followers to honor him, which was a pretty common practice back then. And a book like 2 Peter. Scholars are almost certain it was written long after Peter was gone. So here's the really crucial point. The Gospels aren't first-hand eyewitness reports. As the scholar Bart Ehrman puts it, they're anonymous, third-person accounts written decades, like 30 to 60 years after the events they describe. And they were written by Greek-speaking authors who didn't even live in Palestine. Now, this doesn't make them worthless, not at all, but it completely changes how we should read and understand them. Okay, so if you've got all these different people writing all these different texts, dozens of gospels and letters floating around, that leads to the next big question, right? Who got to decide which books made it into the library and which ones got left on the cutting room floor? Because that selection process, it was anything but simple. And that brings us to the canon. You have to understand, the New Testament as we know it today was not a sure thing. It was the result of a long, messy, and often really heated debate between all these competing Christian groups who had their own ideas about which texts were sacred. So first off, what even is a canon? The word literally meant a measuring stick in Greek. It came to mean the official, authoritative list of books. But here's the thing. It wasn't some top-down decree. It was more like a process of formally approving the texts that had already become the most popular and widely used across hundreds of churches over generations. And this timeline just shows you this was not a quick decision. For over 300 years after Jesus, Christians were arguing about what belonged in their Bible. You look at early lists of sacred books, and they look different from ours. It wasn't until the year 367 that a bishop named Athanasius of Alexandria finally listed the 27 books that we now have, and that was a huge turning point. A big part of this whole debate involved totally different versions of Christianity duking it out. The group that eventually became Orthodox was in a fierce battle with others, like the Gnostics. The Gnostics had some wild ideas. They thought the God of the Old Testament was actually an evil, lower-level God, and that you could only be saved by getting secret knowledge, or gnosis. They even wrote their own gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, which were ultimately shut out of the official canon by the Orthodox group that won the debate. So, okay, the canon is finally set. The library's collection is locked in. But that just opens up an even deeper and maybe more personal question. How are we supposed to read these things? Are they just literal history, word for word? Or is there something else going on just beneath the surface? Because beyond the literal words on the page, so many thinkers, both ancient and modern, have found this deeper, symbolic meaning in these texts. A meaning that doesn't just speak to history, but to the inner landscape of the human soul itself. This is such a great way to put it. A story can be entirely true, but not literally true. Think about that for a second. It means a story can tap into a profound, universal truth about what it means to be human without being a factual, historical report. For example, you could see the crucifixion not just as a historical event, but as a powerful metaphor for the human spirit feeling trapped in the material world. When you look at it this way, the epic stories in the Bible become something else entirely. They're not just about historical figures anymore. They're profound metaphors for our own inner lives. The fight between Jacob and his brother, the temptation in the Garden of Eden, the escape from Egypt. All of these can be seen as dramas playing out inside every single one of us. The Bible becomes a map of our own psychological and spiritual journey. Well, that's the next logical step, isn't it? If these stories are a symbolic map for an inner journey, then where exactly are we supposed to be going? What's the final destination of this whole pilgrimage?
And this is where things get really fascinating, because here we find this surprising, powerful connection between these ancient biblical stories and the mystical art of alchemy. And no, probably not the kind of alchemy you're thinking of.
See, the real alchemists, the mystics, they weren't actually trying to make physical gold. That was a cover. They were using the language of chemistry, of metals and fire, as a code, a metaphor for a process of deep inner transformation. Their great work was about turning the human soul from its base, lead-like state into a perfected, golden one. And they saw this process happening in three main stages. First is the negredo, the blackening. This is a kind of mystical death where the old, broken self is completely broken down. Then comes the albedo, the whitening, a purification, washing away all the junk. And finally, the rubedo, or reddening. This is the union of opposites, like spirit and matter, to create a whole, perfected self.
And what's absolutely amazing is that this ancient process is a perfect mirror for a modern psychological journey. Confronting your shadow, your own inner darkness, that's the negredo. Integrating your unconscious, bringing the hidden parts of yourself into the light, that's the albedo. And finally, achieving self-actualization, becoming a whole integrated person, that's the rubedo. That's creating the philosopher's stone inside yourself.
So we're left with this final provocative thought. What if the Bible's true enduring power isn't about believing in past events or following a set of rules? What if its real secret is that it's a living, symbolic instruction manual for the most profound journey any of us can take, the alchemical transformation of turning the lead of your own ordinary self into pure gold?